Good morning, friends, chess players, and welcome back. What's on the agenda today? Today, we're finally looking at the East Indian. We'll try to understand how to play this variation, which is almost universal. In fact, you can use everything you'll see today against any move by white, except for one move, except for e4. So let's say it's semi-universal. You can play it against d4, against c4, against knight f3, against g, against everything, basically, against everything. You can build this castle, East Indian. So let's get started right away, but I'll begin immediately with an important clarification. This video is an introductory video to help you understand how to play the East Indian at lower levels. The East Indian is an extremely theoretical opening. Let's say that paradoxically, in the East Indian, theory becomes important as we move up in level. So when we play against strong players who throw theory after theory at us, then we need to know it too. A lot of theory. At slightly lower and intermediate levels, in the end, to play the East Indian, it's still enough to know the plans of the East Indian, the breaks and so on, and overall you can get by. But be careful, I repeat, it needs to be studied in depth. Don't think that in 10 to 15 minutes. We can't solve the entire chess repertoire because it's not possible. So obviously I try to give you some introductory ideas, help you understand what the plans are, what the breakthrough pushes are, and that's fine for beginners. Then study them in more depth. Disclaimer, this is important, otherwise people will say that I'm teaching the theory of the King's Indian in 10 minutes, and obviously that's not possible. Everything needs to be put into context. So the King's Indian starts like this with g6, and so we will automatically play g6, bishop to g7, d6, and short castling. So let's say we're giving the center to white, we're making this generous gift. Not that I particularly like this though. In the end, the King's Indian is a very energetic opening, so let's say that now we'll try in some way to challenge this center. Knight to c3, bishop to g7, e4, and now pay attention. We can't castle right away because obviously e5 would hit us in the face, so we defend first with the move d6. At this point, I want to show you the main ideas behind this King's Indian. So first of all, now we're going to castle, and after that, we need to decide which breakthrough push to play. Generally, there are two breakthrough pushes, the push in e5 and the push in c5. Depending on which one we choose, there will be different plans to follow. So let's start by looking at a standard way for white to play, okay? White develops his knight, we castle, and now white plays bishop to e2, so he calmly develops his pieces as well. At this point, we play the move e5. Now, from this point of view, I'll immediately show you the Petrosian variation, so d5, which is also a very common variation. Now, I'll tell you right away, the main line here is the variation with short castling. Strategically, it doesn't change much for us compared to what we're about to do, because simply here, in the classical variation, we'll play the line with knight to c6, so in some way we force our opponent to make a move. d5, and after knight to a7, you'll see that the plans are still quite similar to the Petrosian. So let's look directly at the Petrosian so we can immediately try to understand the ideas. In this position, our breakthrough move will obviously be the pawn push to f5. So what do we want to do next? We want to move the knight away so we can play f5. However, another thing that's very important to us is also to slow down white's play. White's play in this position, of course, is connected to expanding on the queen side. For this reason, here the move we play is a 5. This move is very useful because it blocks white's initiative on the queen side. And of course, we also want to place our knight on c5, which is obviously the strongest square, where it attacks the center and is well positioned overall. If we don't play a 5, none of this is possible, because our opponent will play b4 and obviously will have to retreat. So, a5. At this point, we continue with normal moves, for example, short castling. Then we play knight to a 6. So first, we resolve our own situation. White continues developing with bishop to e3, and here we have an important aspect of this King's Indian. The bishop on e3 is really well placed. In particular, white would love to achieve this structure. Knight to d2, and then play f3. So the structure with the knight on d2 and the bishop on e3 is very strong. We must not allow this to happen. So casually and generally, when white plays the bishop to e3, we want to respond with knight to g4. In this way, let's say our opponent obviously can't afford to lose this bishop, because this bishop is the controller of all the dark squares. In the East Indian, it's said, yes, legend has it that this bishop is worth a rook, so white never wants to give it up. Also because, as you can see, the other bishop is the bad bishop, right? which is quite limited by the pawn. So white definitely doesn't want to trade the bishop for this knight. And here, let's say, look, if the bishop goes here, it's not a problem for us because we play f6. After all, that's what we wanted to do. f5. So white just goes back, and it's simply a waste of time because we get to play f5 for free. So in this position, many people tend to make some slightly less accurate moves. An inaccurate move could be h3, which tries to prepare bishop to e3. But look, here I have time to attack, let's say, the center of white. And so if you now want to defend it as well as before, as I mentioned, with the move knight to d2, obviously the bishop is left blocked. And how do we continue in this structure? We continue with the move knight to e8, and then we want to expand by playing f5. So maybe white can try to defend in advance. But we play our f5. From this point of view, it's unlikely that it would be a good idea for white to play. For example, this capture here, because obviously white gives up their center, and now black is quite active. And after that, they'll want to bring their pieces back and take a bit more control of the center. So let's say that generally what white wants to do is try to expand on the queen side. And to expand on the queen side, they have to be very careful. Because if here white plays the move a3 with the idea of playing b4, black has the possibility to play a4. And look at this. It paralyzes white's queen side, because now if b4 is played, I capture this pawn. At this point, let's say white usually tries to prepare everything first with the move b3, then with the move a3. And so, in the meantime, we continue with our pressure, bring the knight back, maybe play f5. Now, white can play a3, we bring the knight back, and then how do we make our attack on the king side explicit? Exactly in this way. Look, f4, and after that we're ready to launch g5, h5, and the thematic maneuver of the King's Indian, which we'll see shortly. For example, let's suppose that I watch out for b4. I still can't play it because if I capture, obviously the rook is hanging. So maybe white tries to play rook to b1 to prepare b4, and I continue here. I play g5, b4, capture, knight to a6. At this point, it's important for white not to ever play b5 because otherwise, I bring the knight back here and I'm in a very good position. Thank you. And I'm absolutely in a great position. So at this point, let's say white has to try to work towards the move c5. So maybe let's have them develop some pieces, and okay, we can't even do this because this piece would be hanging. You see how it's not so easy for white to prepare the move c5? Let's see here. Maybe we can play bishop to a3. Yes, let's play bishop to a3. So we're trying to work towards c5. Guys, just to be clear, you see, I'm trying to discuss the opening from a practical point of view. I'm not turning on the engine saying this is the engine's best move, this is the worst, because it's pointless to look at it with the engine. You need to understand the ideas, and I'm showing you this position to help you grasp another concept. The idea of rook to f7, a very strong idea. What is the point of rook to f7? Now I want to play the move bishop to f8, which let's say defends my weakness on d6. And now the rook becomes useful. Because let's say, I don't know, let's continue with the moves. For example, queen to b3. Now I want to continue with h5. The rook goes to g7, and then I break through with g4. So this is the typical attacking plan for black, breaking through on the king side. So you see, what I want you to take away from this video is this idea of attack. And then, from time to time, obviously we need to look at what's happening, where the threats are, and put things into context. But the important thing is that you get the idea. The idea, not the computer move. Surely in this analysis, I've made a huge number of mistakes from a computer's point of view, but what I want to convey to you are the ideas, not the computer moves. So, generally when we play for e5, these are the plans, and in the end, we can use these plans in all cases. For example, in the semish variation, in the semis variation. We can also use these plans with e5, it's not a problem. Obviously here, white starts off with a slight advantage for having already established this structure, but that's okay. In the end, the ideas are still there. Knight c8, f5, f4, g5, it's not a problem. An important thing, because earlier I didn't show it to you, my fault, it's important here, when I showed you this position. After e5, there was a pawn hanging. I don't know if you noticed, but actually this pawn isn't hanging. Because after pawn takes, queen takes, knight takes a5, this is the exchange sequence. But here there's the famous King's Indian trick, knight takes e4. At this point, if you take my knight, I take your knight, and we're even. In fact, I'm much more active than you. But if after knight takes e4, you try to make a clever move, right? Knight takes f7, attacking the rook. So if I take the knight, you recapture, and you have one more pawn. Here, there's a very nice tactic, which is removing the attacker. Bishop takes c3, check, so we remove the attacker of the knight. Then at this point, after king takes f7, black is left with an extra piece. So, okay, that move to e5 is played for tactical reasons. Another small note, by the way. So this is about that structure with e5. As you can see, I just showed you one line to help you understand the ideas. Then it needs to be explored further in some positions, especially against this setup. Look, this is the Averbach variation. Sometimes the move e5 is not possible. For example, here there's this very simple trick. Pawn takes, queen takes, rook takes. And here, at this point, the move knight to d5 unfortunately ends the game for us because the knight is pinned. It's attacking our knight, but it's also attacking the pawn. On c7, so for example, if I defend the knight, then comes knight takes c7. So there are some situations where you can't play the move, e5. Now you have two choices. There's an imprecise option, that is, you play knight to d7 first and then e5. It's not precise, but on a practical level, all things considered, you can still manage. The second option instead is to play the variation with the push to c5, which is just as possible. At this point, we're shifting into defensive setups. Benoni, what does that mean? Benoni defense? Here, we need to play this move e6 because we absolutely want to at least open the file. So knight to f3, pawn takes, and rook to e8. You see, we're trying to get some counterplay. And then, something very important in these structures. In the Benoni, our counterplay on the queen side is based on the move b5. So basically, here we play a 6 and somehow try to work towards the move b5. So we expand on the queen side and maybe also put some pressure in the center. We have many interesting squares to take advantage of, like the e5 square. But the only thing I want to tell you, perhaps the most important of all, in the Benoni structure. The key for black is to try to exchange some minor pieces. So here it's very important if we manage, even at the cost of giving up the bishop pair, to make this exchange. In fact, white often plays in such a way as to deny us the bishop, g4. So this is an important thematic idea. In any case, it's a Benoni structure, and by studying the Benoni structure in depth, you can play these positions without any problems. As I mentioned before, if you really want, you can first play knight to d7, then f5. In the end, it all works out. For now, we don't want anything super theoretical, we just want something straightforward. Here's a variation that's simple and easy to play, and that's enough. So those were my thoughts on the King's Indian defense. Again, obviously, this is a quick overview, not the complete theory. I just wanted to give you some ideas on how to play this variation. With these plans, at a beginner or intermediate level, this is enough. As you get stronger, you'll need to study it much more deeply. Please don't be lazy. Well, thank you again for following this lesson today. And if you want to support me, as always, like, subscribe, you know the drill, and I'll see you in the next videos.